Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's message. I'm Eric, the lead pastor of South Mountain Community Church. Thank you for taking just a bit of your time to be with us today. We exist for one reason, and that's to help as many people as possible take their next step towards becoming fully devoted and fully delighted followers of Jesus Christ. And I know that for so many people, church and even religion can be messy and oh so complicated, but it doesn't have to be that way. Here you can belong before you believe. So our hope is that your first visit with us is enjoyable, meaningful, and unlike the church experiences of your past. We also think that the best way to experience delight is with others in person. So SMCC is about more than just a Sunday sermon. We have 5 locations for you to choose from where you can connect with people in authentic community. We want every message you hear to engage your head, your heart, and your hands for a life of full delight. So with all of that in mind, enjoy today's message.
I'm Eric. If we haven't met, I get to serve as one of the pastors here, and I'm really grateful and glad that we can be together today. You know, in life, when things get tense and when things get heated, you and I have 2 default responses. The default response when things are tense, when things are heated, when things are difficult, are the responses of fight or flight. And some of you are like, I was here during the earlier thing where Nick said what we were talking about, and I'm wondering if I'm about to do one of those 2 things. It's fight or flight. It's attack or it is run. And today, when we talk about what we're going to talk about as we begin, today's conversation might produce some of that in you. That would be incredibly normal. But there's also a third way. When things are tense and when things are heated and when things are difficult and we feel a little bit uncomfortable, there's something else that can happen. When we are in a place that feels safe for us, with people who are safe to us, and when trust is growing, we can actually look at the difficult thing and address it. We can hit the tension head on, and we can move through it with some peace, with connection, with safety, towards the end of understanding, the pursuit of understanding together. And it is my hope, in fact, I've been praying about this for weeks for today, that today you would experience that third way, that as we look at something difficult, you would feel so much safety among this group of people that you would be able to have this conversation and not fight or flight. There's probably some fighters in the room and flighters in the room, but you would be able to lean in, secure and safe to do so because of who God is. Because today we are talking about what Jesus said about divorce. And I just want you to know that you are safe today to lean in and for us to address all of this. And as we begin, I just want to spend a few minutes communicating a few ideas that I think can produce that type of safety. And the first idea is from the Old Testament. Buried in the book of Jeremiah, and I didn't see this till just a few months ago, there is this line that God communicates to his people, to us, where God reveals something about himself. It's a statement that's a bit shocking, might shock the system, but it's the type of shock that can produce some safety. In Jeremiah chapter 3, God says this, I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of all her adulteries. God understands what it is like to experience separation, rebellion, violation, maybe even we could say victimization in a relationship to such extremes that he chose the extreme word of divorce to communicate the status of the relationship. When I first read that, it was a shock to the system. But it was a type of shock that produced safety because it tells us, for all of us who have been affected by divorce in some form or fashion, that God knows what it's like to be in that. Always with the hope, though, in this separation between God and Israel, always with the hope of reconciliation in mind. Now, some scholars have taken that verse and gone so far as to say that God himself has experienced divorce. Now, I think that statement can lack some nuance, probably needs an explanation, probably needs a little bit of clarity, but at the very least, it provides the shock to the system necessary for us to go, we don't have to be afraid to address this in church or address this with God. Today, I'm safe to do so. I hope that's what you're feeling now. But there's 5 other things I want to say to help before we get to the tough teaching, the spicy teaching that Jesus once told to a group of people, but is still teaching to us today. And the first thing is this. I'll put it up on the screen. This is what I want you to know. Experiencing a divorce doesn't determine your fault in the divorce. Perhaps you didn't cause it. Perhaps you had to accept it. The word divorce is used a lot in a lot of different ways, as a noun, as an adjective, sometimes as a verb. I've been divorced. I am divorcing you. They are divorced. And in all of that, we don't have enough information to know what's truly happening. You have to have a conversation about how the word is being used. What's the context in the relationship where the word is being used? The second thing I want you to know is this. Divorce, I'll put it up on the screen. Divorce is not always a sin. Divorce is not always a sin, despite what you may have heard. I hope this statement creates safety all the more for us. I want you to know this. When divorce is a sin, it is not the unforgivable sin. Talk about that. Talk about how God can be at work in our lives in the midst of it. The next thing I want you to know is this. Divorce does not define you. If that is in your past, if it is in your present, you don't walk around with a big scarlet D on your forehead that has to shape every bit of your life moving forward. That's not the case. It doesn't define you. In fact, a gospel identity can define you. And the last thing I need you to know is this. Divorce has affected so many in our community. So many people in our church family have experienced this, to the point that when I told some people I was talking about this, they're like, Eric, you know that like a lot of people at SMCC have been through that. I'm like, yeah. That's why I feel like I owe it to us. It would be a gift to us for us to all talk about it together. So with all of this in mind, I just want you to know that if you're going through it now, you've been through it, it's affected your life, you've seen your parents go through it, we got to talk about it. And we have to look at what Jesus said about us. We're going to do that today. But I don't walk into this judgmentally. I know that for some of you, you would have avoided it at all costs if you could, but you couldn't. Okay, it was the most painful moment of your life. I got a text this morning from somebody who said 31 years ago they went through a divorce. They've been remarried now for 31 years, and that moment is still the most painful moment of their lives. 31 years ago. This is real stuff. But I hope with all of this in mind, you feel safe enough to not fight or flight today, but lean in as we look at the helpful and hopeful message of Jesus to this very painful topic. Because today it is a hot one. We're in a series called Hot Ones here, and we're looking at some of the spiciest things that Jesus talked about. And today we're looking at what he said about divorce. And all of that is packaged for us in Matthew chapter 19. All the verses will be up on the screen. And I want to read to you Matthew 19, how it starts, and then we'll look at the complex nature of this conversation. So I'll turn there now. Matthew 19, picking it up in verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee, he went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. So at this point in Jesus' ministry, his leadership, his influence, it is growing very, very rapidly. But as his influence and popularity is growing rapidly, so is the opposition. There are people who do not like what he is saying, and they decide, and they've tried this a couple times, they decide to test him in order to trap him, because if they can trap him within something that he has said, he can get in hot water with Rome or Jerusalem. And either way, the Pharisees and the people who do not like him and oppose him, they're comfortable with either of those options. If he's in trouble with Rome, they will put this to rest, put him away. If he gets in trouble with Jerusalem, well, they will silence him too. So they're looking for some evidence that will get him in hot water, the type of evidence that could silence him. So they come up with a trap, and here's the trap. It's in verse 3, the second part, 3b. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? That was the question. With one question, they have laid a pretty serious and sort of brilliant trap, actually. They are trying to trap Jesus, but for you to see the trap, we have to see the backstory. We have to see the backstory to the trap itself. In the first century, and actually for quite a few years, the rabbis of the day, the leading spiritual leaders, they were talking about how to interpret all of the Old Testament. And so they're going back to some themes, some things that Moses had communicated way back in Deuteronomy chapter 24. We'll see that as the passage continues. But back in Deuteronomy, Moses had communicated some things, and for years, rabbis have been waxing eloquently to explain what Moses really meant. And so the rabbis, they unpacked this in two different ways, commands and concessions. Commands were what God intended from the start. It was what he wanted for people. It was his best for people. It was the truth of how life is to be lived, how humans would flourish. They were commands from God's heart, but there were also concessions. And concessions are these things baked into the Old Testament that would allow for a society to flourish with differing levels of spiritual maturity within the society. So there were commands and concessions. And if you're taking notes, you can remember it like this. Commands express God's heart, while concessions accommodate ours. Commands express God's heart, while concessions, well, they accommodate humanity's. And so in the first century, there was this raging debate. By the way, this paradigm is still helpful for us today as we process this topic. We could say it like this. The command is what was ideal. Ideally, this would be best for humanity. A concession was what was going on really. The ideal versus the real. Truth, grace, command, concession. And built into the conversation around divorce, there was a raging debate in the first century all around something that Moses had talked about. What are the grounds, what are the valid concessions for divorce? And so in the Old Testament, Moses had said this, you can divorce your wife for indecency. Indecency, that was it. To which you're like, what's indecency? And that was at the heart of the question. That's at the heart of the conversation. So in the first century, there were two schools of thought to interpret indecency. There was one Rabbi Shammai, okay? Shammai was pretty popular, but he was losing his influence, okay? They saw him as outdated. He was a little traditional. He was very conservative. He saw indecency only as sexual immorality, as adultery. This was Shammai's take on indecency. It was one school of thought. But on the other side of things, there was the progressive, Rabbi Hillel. So Shammai conservative, Hillel progressive. It was like Salt Lake County, Utah County, okay? You can picture all of this, all right? And if you're new to Utah, ask a neighbor how that all works. But here's what Hillel said. Hillel said this: indecency can be a lot of things. You don't like her behavior? Indecency. You don't like her breath in the morning? Indecency, She's bad at driving? Indecency, all right? Carissa and I would never have made it past year one if that was the case. So Hillel was very progressive. There's actually something on record that says if she burns the bread, it's indecency. He actually said that. Guess who was most popular in the first century? Hillel. He was popular. People liked what he had to say, okay? And so the debate raged on. So do you see the subtle trap? If you lived in the first century, it was a big trap. Is Jesus gonna side with Shammai and go conservative? Because if so, he's at odds with the popular view of the day. He's out of step with culture. He's out of step with Hillel. He's old school. He's conservative. He's outdated. Is Jesus going to side with Shammai, or is Jesus going to side with Hillel? Because if he sides with Hillel, he's out of step with Moses. So either way, the trap has been set. On top of this, John the Baptist has just been arrested and executed for speaking out about divorce and remarriage in King Herod's life. So whatever Jesus says, we're going to trap him. Trap him because he's in the camp of Hillel, trap him because he's in the camp of Shammai, or trap him because he's going to speak out about Herod. And either way, it's going to be the end of Jesus. It's a brilliant trap, isn't it? So what happens? What happens next? Here's Jesus' answer. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female? Jesus goes back further than Moses, back to something before Shammai's take on what Moses said. Jesus goes all the way back to the beginning. And by the way, the book of Genesis means origin. All issues of ethics, morality, gender, sexuality eventually take you to your origin story. It takes you back to the beginning. And so Jesus takes them and us back to there. And he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. The original design behind marriage. Be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two flesh, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. This is where Jesus begins with his answer to their trap, to their questions. Jesus doesn't want people to be divorced. He doesn't want it. Marriage is the fusion of two people into one new entity. Emotional oneness, relational oneness, physical oneness, sexual oneness, financial oneness, social oneness, all of it. It's two becoming one. And this is what Jesus does. He takes us back to the beginning, which reminds us of this. Design helps us understand purpose. And if the design is that two become one, the purpose of this is that it should last. And this is how Jesus begins the conversation. Now, the trap setters think they've kind of got Jesus now. Oh, Jesus, really? You're way more radical than Shammai even. You are far more conservative than him. Oh, by the way, you know what Moses said, right? Jesus, you're out of step with Moses now. I mean, they think they have got him. Game, set, match, checkmate. And we know that because of what they say next. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? It's like, Jesus, we know what Moses said. Deuteronomy chapter 24, for any indecency, you could divorce your wife. We know what Moses said. Jesus, how do you account for this, okay? Jesus, you're saying we shouldn't get divorced? Moses said that we could. You're busted, bro. All right, they think they have him. And here's what Jesus said. Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, and here's the heart of the concession. You want to know what that concession was all about? Here's the concession. Your hearts were hard. That concession was there because you guys, you were so broken to begin with. And your hard heart allowed you to only think about you. You entered into marriage selfishly, as if it were a consumer contract that you could bow out of when it got inconvenient. But your hearts were hard in the first place, and that's why we had to give you this concession, guys. This is what Jesus says. But it was not this way from the beginning. Jesus goes back to the origin of it all, what marriage is all about. Goes back to the beginning. We see in the design of two becoming one, a man leaving his father and mother, the purpose that this should last, a brand new entity, two people's lives fused together. What God joined together, one should separate. No one should separate, including us. This is the kind of unity that God designed. And that's why it's called a marriage covenant. In fact, last night up in Hebrew, I did a wedding where people entered into that covenant, a promise made, not a contractual relationship, but a covenant built on these promises. And then it's sex. It's sex that is this key behavior, this key uniting behavior within the covenant that begins to either build the covenant or with someone outside the covenant, absolutely destroy it, okay? So the disciples, as you can imagine, think this, Jesus, this is a hot take, bro. This is a hot one. This is a little too spicy. I don't think we can accept this. This is how it all wraps up. The disciples said to him, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it's better not to marry. Like if our hearts are so hard and this is the standard and this is what you expect, maybe I should just stay single. Jesus is like, yeah, if your heart's that hard, you probably should. It won't be a great marriage to begin with, okay? He uses an example from their day. Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept this. The eunuch became this illustration of what it would look like to remain single. A eunuch, ask your parents if you don't know what a eunuch is, a lot like my dog Archie, if you know what I mean, okay? That's a eunuch. Archie, okay? Archie's a eunuch, the English Springer in the Nelson household. But the point was this, if your hearts are hard and you can't accept God's design for marriage, why don't you go ahead and remain single? It is better that you do so. And the disciples say, like many today, Jesus, this is out of touch. I don't know if we can accept this. That's Matthew 19. So, just a little bit of a check-in. How you doing? How we doing? Good. One of you is doing great. The others are like, this is the longest sermon. Wow. You might be feeling some guilt, maybe some shame, maybe some anger. You're like, that's not my story. And perhaps you're looking at your scenario and you have like a line in the sand and you're trying to figure out, based on my words, did I cross the line? Did they cross the line? Was it 80% my fault, 20 theirs, vice versa? And it's just, your brain is starting to fill with information that's making it hard to stay engaged. Hang on, hang with me. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 also gives us a lot on this. So we're going to go there next. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Apostle Paul adds some things to it, adds some things to account for the messiness of our situations. And you might say, well, why didn't Jesus add those things? Let me say this. It wasn't in the context or the purview of the trap. What Jesus said was the response to the trap. He's not doing everything. He's not saying everything that he could possibly say about divorce and remarriage in Matthew 19. He's responding to the trap, and we get timeless truth from that. We also get timeless truth from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7. So let's turn there now, and let's allow it to get even messier. Sound good? Here we go. 1 Corinthians 7, picking it up in verse 10, the Apostle Paul says this, "To the married, I give this command, not I, but the Lord." This is the Apostle Paul saying, I know what Jesus has taught. In fact, we all have built some relationships and built these local churches on the things that he taught. And here's what he said. "A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife." So there's the standard, there's the command once again. This thing is for life. Divorce, not an option. Now, this is interesting. There's separation on the women's side, but divorce on the man's side, the husband's side. How do we make sense of that? Well, in the first century, it was often the man that owned the home, owned the property. So if a woman was going to leave, she would truly have to go. She would separate, okay? And the man would be kind of left with all the things, and he would have to file the paperwork most likely anyways, okay? And so there's some different words used here to talk about this. But the passage continues, and this is interesting. When he adds in separation for a season, he's introducing a very helpful concept for us. That in the midst of the tension, separation can happen to allow for people to sort of heal, to regain their strength based on the pain of the situation, and then begin to move through it to hopefully reconcile again. Paul sees that. That's why he talks about separation in the messiness of the situation. But in verse 39, Paul continues, "A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord." Okay, we're starting to be able to connect the dots here. In Matthew 19, someone was not free, but if adultery happened, sex being the thing that nullifies the previous covenant and enters into a new one with somebody else, if that happens, free. And if the person passes away, well, you're free in that scenario too. But the person you marry should believe what you believe. That is really, really important. It's just good advice, okay? Picking it up in verse 40, "In my judgment, she is happier if she stays as she is." I'll, not make any jokes at that point. And then the next part is this, "And I think that I too have the Spirit. I have the Spirit of God." This is Paul saying, this is truth from the Lord as well. So this chapter gives us a lot of instruction for the messiness of life. This also upholds the value of singleness. By the way, single people in the room, you do not need to be married to be saved, happy, loved, any of that. It's a valuable life, a single life. The New Testament upholds it constantly. You are not less than God, okay? Now, one more thing, verse 15 of chapter 7. "But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace." So here's the situation in first century Corinth. It's also the situation 21st century Draper. There were these marriages, and one person in the marriage would decide to follow Jesus. And then the other spouse would respond, "You're a church person now? Give me a break, You're a Jesus freak now? Give me a break, And the other spouse would say, "I need their support. They're not really with me. I feel kind of alone. I think it'd just be better if we got divorced. I'm just going to leave them." The Apostle Paul goes out of his way in 1 Corinthians 7 to say this, "A good principle is to stay as you are for now." Stay as you are, because if you're a Jesus follower in a home with people who are not, they most likely will see the gospel lived out through you. Stay as you are. However, you are free if they leave. You're free if they leave. That leaving could be described as abandonment. Abandonment includes two things: neglect of human functioning and abuse. Neglect and abuse are downstream of this word abandonment. It's an abandonment of the covenant. So if we put it all together, how do we bring this into a harmonizing paradigm? If there's adultery, you're free. If there's abandonment, free. They die, you're free. Okay. So here's how we could describe it. Adultery, abandonment, and death kill the covenant. Kill the covenant. Those three things do that. Adultery, the moment you sexually unite yourself to another, the previous covenant nullified, void, killed. Abandonment, neglect, and abuse inside of the relationship. When that happens and that person leaves the covenant promise they've made, you're free. Divorce is going to happen. You didn't cause it, but you will have to accept it. So painful. And then death. Well, obviously, covenant is killed. Okay? This is how we can bring all of this together. Now, here's the question. This one gets tough, and people have asked me this. What if they say they're a believer and leave? Then what do I do? If they say they're a Christian and they walk away, they abandon, am I not free then? Here, this is difficult. Maybe I'll just say this is my opinion at this point. My opinion is how to think about it, not necessarily what to think about it. In those moments, it's like people are talking about what's the extent of the abandonment, which, by the way, is a really important discussion. And if you're trying to say on your own, they've abandoned me, if you're trying to say on your own that the concession is there now and I'm free, I just want to say this. In the most painful moments of life, don't make that decision in isolation. Get with some people who can help validate the situation to see, okay? Neglect. A budget, ladies, it's not neglect, okay? It's a budget, all right? Let me lighten the mood a little bit more, okay? Going to Lululemon 3 times in a month, if you hear no to that, that's not neglect, okay? Lululemon's very expensive, all right? It's much more than that. It takes maybe the help of a professional. We can recommend some fabulous counselors for you to help you understand. Oh, you're still laughing, the Lululemon joke, yeah. Okay. Where was I? I was saying something else. Oh, the non-believer thing. Okay, here's what I think. Instead of trying to figure out, is it abandonment? Are they free? I think it's helpful to just ask, if you're leaving the marriage, if you're walking away from the covenant, are you a believer? Are you a Jesus follower? Because the fruit of your life looks like no right now. I think that's at the heart of the question. And just because they sat with you in church for a few years through the marriage, they sat with you in church, they sang the songs, they prayed, they had the bumper sticker. If they're going to walk away from a covenant, oh so holy is the covenant of marriage, I would just ask the question, are you a Christian? Does he have your loyalty? That's, I think, the way to start that conversation, okay? So let me talk to the Christians in the room. Christians in the room, here's the advice. More than that, if you're a Christian, this is what God teaches, his word says. Don't break the covenant. Christians in the room, don't kill the covenant. As far as it goes with you, as far as it's your responsibility, please do not kill your covenant. The other might kill it. That could happen. As far as it goes with you, don't kill the covenant. And this is how we can connect all of the dots, okay? So in the time we have left, how about 3 simple and quick questions as we try to wrap up? The first question I have for us is this question. How do I stay in a difficult marriage? How do I stay? Let me just say this. Every marriage is difficult. That's what you're signing up for, difficulty, okay? 2 people becoming one, it is not easy. It's just not. In fact, I think God knew it would be difficult, but he knew that in the midst of the difficulty would drive her deeper into our need for the gospel. And then marriage can be something that helps us be more like Jesus. It's gonna be difficult. Let me say this. There is abuse. Hear me clearly. It is time to separate. Please do not stay in that situation. We have wonderful counselors, leaders, godly people that can help you through the process. Hear that very clearly. If abuse is happening, it is time to separate. Let me say this too. If adultery has happened, you need to know some of the happiest marriages I know are on the other side of adultery. It is oh so difficult. There's a way through it. Marriage is going to be difficult. Don't let difficult be a reason to kill the covenant. Get the help you need. There can be joy, there can be oneness, there can be unity in the midst of the difficulty, okay? Second question is this question. If I'm divorced, should I get remarried? Well, when the divorce was based on a valid concession, the answer is yes, you can get remarried. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should, okay? You gotta wrestle with that. How much time has gone by? You gotta give it some time. I think, this is just me talking, years. 1, 2, 3, give it some time. Time to heal, time to forgive, time to work through the baggage, time to get some wisdom, time to check in on how the kids are doing. Take some time. Remember, being single is an incredible way to live. The New Testament upholds it. So I want you to remember that. Has enough time passed? It's important. Get help to know. Here's the third question. If I'm divorced and remarried, how does God see me? He redeems you, he renews you, forgives you, and he loves you. Past doesn't define you. God's not going to waste it either. Not going to waste that hurt and that pain. He knows what it's like to suffer in the midst of that. Looked at that in Jeremiah chapter 3. So he's with you in it. And if the mistakes were your fault, he can forgive you. He doesn't love you any less. If the mistakes were their fault, he knows what it's like to suffer that. Okay? So I think through all of this, there's a lot of hope for us. He's not done with us. 2 resources I want you to know about. The first is on our website. We have a section called resources, and we have what we call a white paper that gives more time and space to the arguments and the text that we're talking through today. I'd encourage you to check that out if you'd like to wrestle with this a little bit more. The second thing is if you want a group of people to belong to in the midst of it, like we talked about earlier, divorce care, room 102, Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. They're some of the safest, best people to walk with you through all of this. So here's the bottom line. God comforts the offended. Bottom line is this: God comforts the offended, and he forgives the offender. That should include all of us, right? It should include all of us. It should be a truth that's applicable in every one of our situations. And so if you were the one who was offended on the end of some sin and some mistake that was oh so painful, God wants to comfort you. And if you were the one who did the offending, you did the hurting, God forgives that too. So the disciples said, "This is hard, Jesus, who can accept it?" I hope we would be the people who would say, "Jesus, we can accept this because we accept you, and we know that what you taught is in our best interest." So if your life now or in the past, or maybe even in the future, is going to be impacted or has been impacted by the brokenness that comes from a broken covenant, would you know this? Jesus will never break his covenant with. So here's what I want to do. We're going to end a little bit differently. I've asked the band to sing a pretty specific song for us, and I just want you to sit in your seats and take a breath. It's been heavy. I want you to enjoy the beauty of these lyrics, the beauty of this melody, and remind yourself some of the truths of the gospel that we've talked about today. You're not unforgivable. You're not defined by this. There's hope on the other side of this. Perhaps you know somebody like I know right now struggling on the brink of divorce. Maybe this is your moment to pray for them. Or maybe this is your moment to bring your painful emotions before your Heavenly Father. He can handle it and he can hear it. And I hope that the beauty of this song would allow you the mismatching experience of something so painful to be held so safely in the arms of a God who understands. And then I will come back up and wrap us up.
If you're only longing for someone to hear you, if your burdens feel like more than you can bear, if you're searching for a place to just be honest, come just as you are. If you're tired of just hoping for an answer, if you're wishing you could let your guard come down, if you feel like you can't hold it all together, come just as you are. There's no need for any hiding. In the Father's house you're met with open arms, and He gives grace without condition. As you are, with nothing else, just come. There is space for everyone who feels unworthy, a place for those those who've never felt at home, where you don't have to wonder if you're wanted. Come just as you are. There is hope for you and me. His name is Jesus. He's the one who makes the broken whole again. Now there's no need for you to pick up all the pieces. Come just as you are. There's no need for any hiding. In the Father's house you're met with open arms, and He gives grace without conditions. As you are, nothing else, just come. There's no need for any hiding. In the Father's house you're met with open arms, and He gives grace without conditions. As you are, nothing else, just come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus. There's no need for any hiding. In the Father's house you're met with open arms, and He gives grace without condition. As you are, nothing else, just come. Maybe you have always thought of God as distant. Maybe you have never trusted Him at all. There's safety here to wrestle with your questions. Oh, come just as you are.
Let's pray together. Jesus, we come just as we are, broken, feeling unworthy perhaps, with questions, and we've never been honest even with you, maybe even with ourselves. And so here we are as we are. I'm so grateful for the 60 minutes we've had together to experience the safety that comes from a God who is good and a God who is gracious, in a church with people that create space for our brokenness. So we come as we are, and perhaps we've never trusted you before, but we want to take a step to you with all of our brokenness now, knowing that we're met with unconditional love, unconditional grace, salvation from you. And when we can't put the pieces of our lives back together, I pray that you would slowly, over time, through the goodness of your truth and the goodness of your people, allow us to experience your healing and wholeness. I pray this moment would just kind of go down in our hearts and our lives as a place where we took a step to come to Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Hey, before
Thank you so much for joining us for today's message and trusting us with your time. If you'd like to connect with one of our pastors or staff, you can easily do that by visiting smccutah.org/connect. When you fill out that quick form, they will get back to you within a few days and be able to connect with you. As well, if you'd like to know more about taking a next step at SMCC, you can easily look at what next steps we have by visiting smccutah.org/next steps. And lastly, if you found today's message both hopeful and helpful, I would encourage you to do maybe one of two things. First, you can share this message with someone that would find it helpful. And you can also choose to partner with us financially so that more people can see messages like this. You can find more information on what that looks like by visiting smccutah.org/give. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you at one of our locations soon.